This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. For over a decade, Chaz Powell has been backpacking in remote places around the world. Starting in August 2016, Chaz began an attempt to walk the length of the Zambezi River, starting at the source near Kalene Hills in northwestern Zambia. He walked for nearly 1,300 miles in 97 days through one of the most remote parts of the world, most of the time alone and self-supported. The goal was to reach the Indian Ocean, but Chaz fell short by 600 miles due to the dangers of traveling through Mozambique. His main goal is to raise money and awareness for wildlife conservation throughout Africa and to highlight the growing concerns of wildlife crimes across the globe. He is supporting the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, and you can learn more about Chaz and his adventures at thewildestjourney.com. Chaz Powell, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, Paul.
Chaz, I'm curious if we go quite a ways back, because a lot of people tend to go to university, get an office job, tire of the office job, and then go into this world of adventure. Did you follow that same sort of path?
Not really, to be honest. I sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was in my sort of teenage years. So I sort of struggled to find any direction with a career or anything like that. I guess all I really ever wanted to do was just escape that situation and travel, really. But I sort of, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I did like a bit of a test at school, which sort of showed me my strengths, my weaknesses, and one of the things it said I was good at was admin, sort of information technology, and I had no clue about administration. I didn't, it was never really an interest of mine, so I pursued a career in admin for about 6 months, and I decided I hated it, and that's when I decided I just needed to escape and travel. So yeah, I never really settled with a career as such.
When I read through your bio, it said that you lived in a van for 2 years. Tell me about what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in vans in the past. I lived in a camper van in Australia for a while, and when I came back to the UK in 2012, I didn't have anywhere to live. I didn't really have any. I didn't have much money, so I bought a cheap van, and the idea was to train to be a mountain leader. And because I was in the mountains quite a lot of the time, I decided to live in the van during the week, and then during the weekend I'd be out camping and living in the wild. So living in a van, it was ideal, to be honest, and I think I'd probably do it again if I had the chance. But yeah, it was an alternative lifestyle, and I really enjoyed it.
What kind of van was it?
It was a Mercedes Vito van, so it was I guess it's a similar size to a Volkswagen Transporter van. It wasn't like a huge van, it was probably a mid-size sort of van, really.
Is that designed to be a camper van, or was it just empty inside?
It was empty, and I converted it. So I converted it, put a bed inside it and some cupboards and a little stove and things like that, and made a bit of a conversion. Yeah, I've done it quite a few times. But at the moment, I've got a small van. I'm converting to be like a micro camper. It's ideal when you're sort of a freelance outdoor instructor to obviously go to places all the time, different places. It's just somewhere to sleep in the back, so it's pretty perfect, to be honest.
You mentioned there's a 3-part puzzle to becoming an expedition leader. What are those 3 parts?
Well, as an expedition leader here in the UK, you have to have sort of the 3-part puzzle, which is some remote travel experience. So you've got to have at least 6 weeks to sort of 3 months remote travel experience, potentially somewhere, off the beaten track a little bit. Obviously, as well as travel experience, you need to have a mountain leader qualification, which is a summer mountain leader qualification, which gives you a qualification so you're experienced to lead people in the outdoors in remote environments. You've got the skills and knowledge to obviously to back it up if anything goes wrong. And also you've got to have experience teaching in a remote outdoor environment as well. So when I came back from my travels, I had a lot of travel experience. I had my qualification. Then the last sort of few years, I've been teaching bushcraft to school groups, which has given me that third part of the puzzle. So yeah, you have to have all of those things to obviously to be qualified as a leader.
When you say bushcraft, what does that mean? What are you teaching?
As a bushcraft instructor, I teach survival pretty much. I teach, shelter building, fire lighting, trap making, foraging. Yeah, it's just sort of living in the woods, in a woodland environment or in an outdoor environment. It's sort of teaching survival.
The Zambezi River, what do we need to know about it?
The Zambezi, it's the fourth longest river in Africa. It flows for 1,300 miles. Through 6 countries. The countries it goes through is north. It starts in northwestern Zambia, in a place called the Kalene Hills. It's a small sort of trinkle out of a tree, which then flows into Angola. It flows for Angola for 150 miles. Then it comes back into Zambia, flows into Zambia, borders Zambia, Namibia, Zambia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Then it flows into Mozambique, into the Indian Ocean. It's home to many of the world's most sort of wild animals, the lions, hippos, elephants, crocodiles. It's full of wildlife and lots of different remote areas, different tribes, different habitats. It's a very wild and relatively unexplored place, to be honest. It's an amazing place.
Is that why you chose it? And did you consider other rivers?
Yeah, I guess it was the only river I'd considered walking. I mean, I've walked a few other little rivers. I call them little, but a few little practice rivers. But the Zambezi really sort of drew me to it because of the wildlife, the cultures, the issues that are happening with conservation out there. The elephants and rhinos in particular that have been wiped off the face of the earth due to poaching and different issues. That really sort of struck home, and I wanted to do it. I guess I wanted to do a wild adventure. You look at people like David Livingstone and these other explorers that sort of went into the areas. Not much has changed since, as far as the way people live and the culture and things like that. That's what really drew me to it, and I just wanted to explore these areas and take a really wild adventure that was pushing me to my limits, to be honest. And it really did.
How did you prepare? What kind of training and research did you do?
The main sort of things I had to research really was timings. Along the river, there's a huge floodplain, the Barotse floodplain, which is about 400 miles long, and certain times of the year that's just completely flooded underwater. And I chose to walk in the hottest time of year due to the fact that there's only certain months I could walk through this floodplain. So that was one thing I obviously had to get timing right. Then I had to obviously think about protecting myself from the sun, different equipment I was going to use, and different anti-malarials, different preventions, figure out how I was going to cope through walking through wildlife, get different permissions to walk through different areas. And it was a long process. I think 2 years of planning altogether, from the actual thinking about doing it stage to the actually doing it stage, was 2 years of making sure I had every single thing covered, even things like drinking the water from the river. I had to get the right filters, the right purification, what food was I going to eat, and it was, to be honest, most of it, that was all sort of little bits and pieces, but most of it is just having the head and the drive to just get out and do it, and a lot of that stuff didn't really matter in the end. It was a case of just get out there and go for it, really.
What kind of a budget did you need for this?
I was really unsure about the budget, to be honest. I mean, I had my flights covered already with my expedition team that I went out with. I led an expedition before the actual personal expedition. I led an expedition in Zambia, and so my flights were already paid for. That was the biggest cost. Visas are pretty much, straightforward as such. I think it's $80 for a multiple entry visa into Zambia. So I was going in and out of countries, and that was all sort of covered. As far as food goes, I think I was probably spending maybe £10 a week on food, sort of simple foods. Most of the time I was eating with local people. I was being looked after really well by different sort of organisations along the way, different lodges, different schools and things like that. They were sort of supporting me as far as financially, food-wise, accommodation-wise. I was carrying my tents. it didn't really cost much. It was pretty simple in that side of it. The things that sort of added up was maybe equipment, making sure I had the right equipment, spending a bit of money on that beforehand. There was a few little problems. I had to pay for a permit, which cost me $400, and I guess altogether maybe £2,000. I think was probably the budget, I'd say, as well as flights. I guess probably £3,000.
Were you eating the local food?
Yeah, I mean, I'd carry dry foods like pasta. I'd carry rice. I'd carry oats. I'd carry really sort of lightweight food. Then I'd mix it with whatever I could find along the way. But most of the time, I was being looked after by the villagers and the schools and things like that. They just feed me. They feed me local dishes like enshima, which is like I guess for them it's like corn maize. It was grounded up into a powder, made into like a mashed potato looking substance. And we all sit around eating it with our hands in the community, in the villages and things. And also, yeah, to be honest, most of the time I ate with the villagers. Either it be a fish they just caught out of the river or some kind of bush meat. I'd always eat with the villagers. I got looked after really well, but I did lose a lot of weight, and it was difficult to try and keep it on, as far as walking and getting enough food. But
I think you said 3 stone, which is 42 pounds.
Yeah, by the end of the journey, I'd become quite frail and malnutritioned. I guess I'd lost 3 stone, and I didn't feel in myself I'd lost that much. But when I weighed myself, I was quite shocked. I think a lot of it was down to the heat. It was 50 degrees, and I was constantly just sweating, walking along, and you could never get enough water inside your system. And meal times, it was just whenever I could eat, I guess. I definitely needed probably double the calories at least I was taking in my body. So, yeah, I lost a lot of weight, but I was expecting to lose weight. I guess it was such a wild adventure that it was always going to happen.
What kind of temperatures are we talking about?
The hottest, I had a little temperature gauge on my bag, and the hottest temperature I saw was, it goes up to 50 degrees, and it was touching that a lot of the time. It was touching 50. It was very rare. It was under 40 degrees. It was always in between 40 degrees Celsius and 50 degrees Celsius. So it was just insanely hot every day. And it was probably my biggest problem was the heat. I was constantly getting ill and sick due to heat stroke and things like that.
That's 50 degrees is 122 Fahrenheit. So how do you recover when you get sick like that and you can't escape it?
Yeah, it's just a case of getting out the heat, getting out the sun, getting in the shade, drinking water, and just resting. To be honest, there was a couple of times I got quite seriously sick, and I'd always end up somewhere where I was being looked after a little bit. So I'd just rest in the shade and just sleep and drink water and just regain my strength. Yeah, it was difficult. It was really difficult, but to be honest, I just conditioned and my body got used to it. So.
How do you get to the starting point? Did you start flying from London?
Yeah, I flew from London to Livingstone in Zambia. From Livingstone in Zambia, I got the local bus to Lusaka, which is the capital. And then from Lusaka, I got another bus to Mawinilunga, which is the nearest sort of town to the source of the river. And from Mawinilunga, I got a taxi to the source. It took me about 3 days to get from Livingstone to the source of the river. So I had to go to Lusaka and to obviously Mawinilunga, then stay in Mawinilunga, and it was a bit of a difficult task to get to the source, but it's part of the adventure, just getting there and finding the source and things, and making my journey back.
Chaz, what do you see out there? What kind of landscapes are you walking through from the start to the finish?
The start by the source, it's quite overgrown. It's quite jungly. It's sort of thick jungle, sort of bushland, overgrown. And I just sort of had to hack through it a little bit to get to a decent path. And then eventually it sort of goes into paths which go through villages. And, the start of the river, it just meanders so much. It's impossible to pretty much follow every little bit of it. So I was always trying to take the nearest path that I could join onto the river. So it was just really overgrown, really sort of, just really sort of jungly, I guess. And then eventually it got to sort of sandy areas, really sandy paths, opened up into giant plains, floodplains every now and again. And then eventually, once I got back near the river started to get bigger and bigger, it just turned into huge floodplains, which is obviously the Brotsi floodplain. There's three parts of the Zambezi. There's the upper Zambezi, there's the middle Zambezi, then there's the lower Zambezi. The upper Zambezi is quite jungly, quite flat. Middle Zambezi is a huge giant gorge, and the Lake Kariba section, which is all hilly and sort of steep. The lower Zambezi is when it drops down into Mozambique, and that's the bit I haven't done yet, so I need to find out what that bit's like. But yeah, it changes, the habitat, the environment just changes all the time. Pretty incredible.
What was the toughest part, the upper or the middle?
Probably the middle. I had quite a few difficult times along the middle. The middle of the Zambezi is when Victoria Falls, it reaches there and it drops down. So yeah, I had quite a bit of difficult times. When I got to the middle, I had to walk through the gorges, which is pretty just steep-sided, huge gorge, which goes for 150 miles. And during that time, I got into a bit of a difficulty. I was walking down in the gorges, and it's basically just a huge boulder field either side of the river, and you just clamber over these boulders, and it takes so much time and so much energy. And I was probably covering 3 miles a day down them gorges, and I actually tried to take a shortcut, tried to head up the top of the gorge and cut across overland at the top. But what I didn't realize is the top of the gorge is basically another series of gorges that drops down into the main gorge. When I got to the top, I'd soon run out of water. It was touching 50 degrees again, and I got seriously dehydrated, lost. Couldn't get back down into the river. I had a satellite communicator phone, which ended up, I had to call for an SOS signal, try and get help. I was getting really sick. I was getting dehydrated. And in the end, they were trying to get helicopters to me. They couldn't get a helicopter to me. So in the end, I had to drink my own urine and clamber down cliffs. I had a fall, cut my leg, I cut my nose. I was bleeding, my hands were bleeding. And eventually, after a very, very difficult day, I got back down to the river and to the safety of the water. And I had to then, from that point, I had to head back to Livingston and take an overland route instead, because that middle section was just absolutely insane. It was so difficult. And I probably didn't plan enough for it, to be honest. So, yeah.
So what happened to the SOS? I mean, does it just get canceled, or how does that work itself out?
Yeah, with the SOS, I'm communicating with guys in the US, actually, because there's a Garmin InReach center there. I was communicating with them, and they were trying to get me help. They're obviously the eyes on the ground, and they're helping me get help and things like that. And as soon as I knew I was okay, I sent them a message back saying, I'm back by the river. It's gone from critical to, to the fact I'm probably okay now, and I'm just going to head back. So it was a case of just communication, non-stop communication, and I don't think they actually managed to get a helicopter anyway. So it was probably the best thing that I managed to get down, and that area where I was, it was so remote, so overgrown that there's very little help that I could have got from anywhere nearby. So it was, it was a very difficult day, very difficult decisions I had to make and things. So yeah, very lucky to be alive, to be honest.
I want to take a minute to talk about your kit. You mentioned you were hacking through some stuff, so I'm wondering, are you carrying a machete, and what are you carrying in your backpack?
Yeah, I mean, hacking's probably the wrong word. I was I guess trampling through stuff. I didn't carry machetes and knives. I was just sort of forcing my way through the bush a little bit, through little paths and things. Yeah, I carried a small lightweight tent, a small sort of sleeping bag with built-in mosquito nets. I carried a small sleeping mat. I carried 2 small lightweight pots to cook with on fires. I carried a water filtration bottle called Water to Go. I'm also sponsored by Craghoppers during this trip, and even now I'm sponsored by Craghoppers, and they supplied me with clothing which is insect repellent treated, Nosy Life. It's like long sleeve shirts that are insect repellent, sun repellent, and I had 2 shirts, so I'd always wear one, then have one in my bag, and just wash them every time in the river when I need to change. 2 pairs of trousers, some lightweight sort of sandals, some lightweight breathable walking shoes, a couple of pairs of underwear, and a couple of first aid kits, satellite phone, GPS, a road map, and a solar panel, battery packs, and 2 cameras. I think that was about it. I tried to stay as minimal as possible. Obviously, I didn't want to be carrying too much, and I think my pack only weighed about probably 10 or 15 kilograms. It wasn't too bad.
You mentioned that 60% of the walk was done in a 15-pound pair of sandals.
Yeah, I ummed and ahed about what footwear I was going to wear for such a long time in the build-up to the walk, and I tried Gore-Tex walking boots, and I soon realised, well, this is before I actually went out to Africa. I was practicing my walks, and I soon realised that wasn't going to be the ideal choice. So I switched to a pair of Merrell breathable walking shoes, which were good, but they, in the paths I was walking on, it was so sandy and so sort of dry that my feet were just rubbing all the time, and there was sand going in my shoes. And in the end, I had these 15-pound pair of sandals, which I just put on, and as soon as I was wearing them, I just felt comfortable. I felt like there was no blisters. All the areas that were getting blisters, it wasn't happening because it wasn't rubbing on them areas. And if I can recommend any kit to take, I'd always say to people, take a pair of sandals, because it just lets your feet breathe, and it's so unbelievable how less pressure it takes off you and things. But that could have just been me, but that was really, really good purchase, and really, I really overanalyzed the fact that taking too much footwear, really. But yeah, perfect, really.
So as you're walking along and you're going through from village to village, when you meet up with the locals, what happens? How do they react to you?
Yeah, this was probably one of the most difficult things I had to put up with, to be honest. As soon as I reached the village, I'd either see one of the children filling up water or carrying something, and as soon as they saw me, it was a huge state of panic. They'd throw whatever they were carrying, they'd scream, and they'd literally run like an Olympic sprinter. You'd see them running in terror as fast as they could. As soon as they reached the village, they obviously told the people on the village that there's someone coming, and everyone came out really inquisitive and really, really confused about why I was there. You've got to understand that most of these people, especially the children, they've never seen a white person. They've never seen anyone from out of their village, and for them it was like, is this a ghost? Is this the devil? Is this a reincarnation of Livingston? I got accused of being so many things, but once I'd explained to the villagers what I was doing and why I was there, they soon calmed down, and the confusion turned to intrigue and happiness, I guess. Once they knew who I was and I was a visitor, it was like a huge sort of, everyone was just really happy to see me, and they all sat around looking at me. The sort of kids were touching my hands because they'd never seen any white person's hands, and they were just, it was very bizarre. And this happened probably maybe up to 10 or 20 times a day. I'd reach a village, and I'd have to go through the same process. So it got quite mentally draining, and after a while, I sort of panic every time I reached the village, because I knew I had to go through this procedure of explaining myself and the screams, and But it was, I guess that's what I wanted. I wanted I wanted to discover and explore these places. So it was fascinating.
Was there any language barrier, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, the main language in Zambia is English, but there's also in Zambia, there's 72 different tribes, 72 different languages. So each time I sort of crossed over a tributary or reached another village, there would always be a different tribe. So I learned some of the main local tribal language. I learned a few phrases in those to get by, as far as directions and food and, sort of greetings and just being generally nice to people and things. But most of the time there would always be some kind of school, and they'd always speak some kind of English. So I'd always be able to explain myself in broken English to some people, and it was like that. I'd sort of have a system really of going to the schools direct, speaking to the teachers, speaking to the staff, and then they'd obviously communicate with the head man, the villagers, and then it was sort of a straightforward process in that sense, really. Initially, as well, one thing I haven't mentioned, I did have a guide to start with, who actually was a big part of the planning process, and he was supposed to be my translator. He was a doctor who was supposed to be my local guide, but actually the first day of the walk, he turned around and decided he couldn't do it. So I was obviously left on my own to try and communicate with people, which is quite tough.
Why did he decide that he couldn't do it?
Yeah, I mean, it was very strange, to be honest. I think the reality of what we were about to do was pretty different to the thought of it. The build up to it had been on TV. We'd done interviews, been in newspapers, and he was embracing this, and he was enjoying the fact that we were doing this wild adventure, and people loved the adventure of it, but the actual thought of what we were about to do, we were in the middle of nowhere, we were in the middle of a jungle. We had to hack through these bushes, trample through these areas, and the thought of that for him was like, he realised it was going to be too much. There's a lot of pressure at that point, and he said to himself, he's made an early judgment call, and he can't do it. So, I was quite annoyed with him. I was quite angry to start with, because he'd been part of the build-up for quite a while, and I was left alone in the middle of nowhere, and it was quite a difficult pill to swallow, I guess. I mean, it was one of those things, and it's probably the best thing that could have happened, to be honest.
Chaz, when you get into a village, what's it like? What do you see? How many people typically live there? What are the structures like? Are there animals there? Tell me about that.
They sort of live in small, sort of wooden mud huts, simple constructions, sort of brave, primitive lifestyles. They've got these small huts. You've got the animals living in the house, the chickens, the goats, things like that, living with the people. You'll normally have a family. The family will be living together. You'll have the village elder, then you'll have obviously the family members and the children. They'll normally have a little space outside to cook, so small little shelter outside where they cook underneath. You don't ever see any substantial buildings unless it's a church. They obviously normally have like a big communal church in the middle of the village. Then there'll be a school as well, which is quite a substantial building. But other than that, it's just small mud huts and things.
So what about the size? Are we talking 50 people, 100 people or more?
Most of the time, the village is normally a family or they're related. So each village would probably have about 2 or 3 families in. So you'd probably have at least maybe 30 people in the village. But then the villages were quite close together as well. So maybe another half a mile to a mile, there'd be another village. And in between them 2 villages, there'd be like a water pump or a church and a school. So you'd always have a village, something in between, like a school, water pump, then another village. So the children from either village haven't got far to walk to the schools and the church and the water and things like that.
You mentioned that when you saw the sight of power lines that you kind of got excited. What did that mean to you?
Yeah, it was really weird. When I actually saw power lines, I knew that I was either near a village or near a town, which was going to be quite substantial, which meant, it sounds a bit weird now, but I was so, hot all the time, and I was drinking river water from my water bottle, and within, half an hour, these bottles of water I was drinking were actually really warm. So I was drinking warm river water all the time. And then from there, every time I saw a power line, I knew that it was going to mean cold drinks. So obviously reaching an area, drinking cold drinks, and then I'd obviously rehydrate and cool down. So it was always really strange, but it was quite exciting.
What was your favorite cold drink?
Probably Coca-Cola and Fanta. I just literally, it'd be a mixture of the caffeine, obviously, and the Coke and the bubbles and the coldness of it. I'd just probably drink 2 or 3 bottles as soon as I reached the shop. And then Fanta as well. Just any kind of fizzy drink really that was going to rehydrate me. Most of the time, it was difficult to find. Obviously, Coca-Cola and things. It's the middle of Africa. You'd get some kind of cheap version of it, which would be amazing. Though, to be honest, it was just anything that was going to cool me down.
Besides the heat, what other dangers were you facing out there?
As far as the heat, there was obviously the animals. The animals were always going to be a huge concern, not just the crocodiles and the hippos and the lions, but mosquitoes as well. Mosquitoes obviously protecting myself from them, taking anti-malarial tablets, wearing long sleeves, sleeping in mosquito nets. I was very aware that, malaria is a huge, huge problem out there. So that was a big concern. Also, the crocodiles, I'd have to tread carefully by the river due to the fact that, obviously there is a lot of wild animals. There is a lot of crocodiles. I did wake up to the sound of hippos every morning, and there was very wild animals there. I was charged by elephants. I had lions roaring at night near my tent. There was a lot of dangers. People-wise, I didn't have too much trouble with people until the actual end of the journey, when I actually was forced to stop my walk due to security reasons. But there was only the odd drunk person that would give me a bit of trouble in a village. But other than that, people were fine. I couldn't get into Angola. I had issues with visas, so I had to walk around Angola. It was about 150 miles, that part. But then if I had have walked through that section, every single person I'd met prior to actually reaching that area had been warning me about landmines and wildlife. So probably going to be too dangerous to actually walk through that section anyway. So yeah, there was a lot of difficult, dangerous situations.
So what do you do when you get charged by an elephant?
Panic. No, it only happened once, and so the elephants, when they charged, you're meant to stay still. You're meant to sort of not move, and obviously stand your ground, sort of thing. But when it actually happened to me, that all went out of my head a little bit, and I just sort of moved through the trees and sort of got down into this dip that was next to me, and just moved away from the elephant, to be honest. But thinking back, that was probably a bit of a silly thing to do. But elephants normally give you a warning. They'll give you a warning charge. If you obviously back off after that point, they won't attack. But if you carry on, the second time it won't be a warning. It'll be sort of, get out of the way sort of thing. Yeah, it was quite scary.
So how close were the elephant to you?
The elephant itself, it was probably within maybe 10 meters from me when I actually decided to move, but I could hear it running through the bush. I could hear this massive breaking of trees, this huge noise coming towards me, and I knew there was something coming towards me, and that was when my little sort of legs went to jelly a little bit, and I looked, and this big bull elephant was storming towards me, and that was when I decided to make a decision just to stand my ground or move, and I actually moved. So I decided to move and just get out of there.
So what exactly happened at the end? Did you reach the Mozambique border, and is that where you got turned back, or what happened?
Yeah, it was a mixture of reaching these areas, the Lower Zambezi National Park, which was very dangerous. Obviously, I was told I couldn't walk through this area due to the fact there's so much wildlife. But before that, I tried to get permission. I tried to get permits to go through that region, and they basically said we can issue you permits, but you'll have to get it from the office when you get to that area. So when I reached that area and I tried to get permission, they said no, you can't go through this area. We've never let anyone walk through here before. It's very dangerous, and basically, we can't let you through. So I obviously looked into every which way of trying to get through, and it wasn't going to happen. So that was an area 100 odd kilometers that I would have to miss out. So then I was going to decide to walk around the national park, which would have took me well away from the river, but it was probably my only option. Then enter Mozambique, which was about 150 kilometers from that area. But the trouble in Mozambique, I'd heard beforehand that I had to be careful and that there's a lot of trouble happening in that area. And when I went to immigration, they sat me down and they said to me, we can let you in the country, but there's a very high chance you're going to get shot or kidnapped during along them areas you're going to be going through. And I'd already promised people back home after my incident in the gorge that if any more danger happens, I'd call it quits and head home, So in the end, it was a very, very difficult decision, probably the most difficult decision I've ever had to make. I was so determined, so driven to get through that area. And I was 600 kilometers from the ocean, and to finish at that point was devastating. I'd walked 3/4 of the river, and I chose life. I chose that I'd rather live and take more adventures than try and finish this one. But I'm going back this year as well. I'm going back this year in July and August to try and continue and see if the situation's calmed down. I'm going to try and reach the Indian Ocean. I'm so determined to complete my goal and to walk the whole river.
So what's the situation as you know it? Is it just like some rebels or insurgency, or what's happening?
Yeah, there's a rebel force and a government force, and they're clashing all the time. To be honest, I don't know too many about the who's who and things like that. But yeah, there's two different sides to this. Obviously, the rebels and the government, and there's just people getting shot, people getting kidnapped, and it was apparently at the time it was very, very bad. During that time I was walking. So it's hard to tell. It's really difficult to tell. Sometimes I'll ask people in Mozambique, what's the situation like? They're like, it's fine. Then I'll ask, I'll go on the government websites and things like that, and it'll obviously give you the red card as if you can't go these areas. It's too dangerous. There's potential death threats and things. So, some of me thinks maybe I should have just risked it and walked and just seen, but then, yeah, it was such a difficult decision, and it's really hard to really know what was going on and who was killing who, but it was just a very wild time.
Tell me about the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation that you're supporting.
Yeah, the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, obviously a foundation obviously hugely based on wildlife conservation, and I chose to support them because basically most of the ideas and the work they're doing out is around the regions I'm walking. So the projects they have set up, the anti-poaching projects, the conservation projects, the increasing of habitats and things like that for the wildlife. It's all stuff that I'm very interested about. The education of the youth, on wildlife conservation. Every project they're doing out in Africa is something I'm hugely passionate about. So I chose to support them, and they're a really good charity, to be honest, and especially the anti-poaching as well. That's something now that's so important. They work with the conservation out in Zambia, and it's just something I really, really want to get on board with, to be honest.
Looking back on this adventure, Chaz, what's the most memorable moment for you?
That is a really difficult question, because every day there was a memorable moment, and I think of a lot of the bad things, like the time in the gorges when I nearly died. That's always going to be in my mind. That's always something I speak about. But then I go back to day one when I was left on my own, and the confusion, and even the little times when I was just sat there on my own in solitude, that I'd be sat there and then I'd look out to the water and a hippo would pop up and just look at me, and I'd sort of acknowledge it. He'd acknowledge me, then he'd go back down. Little moments like that, and there was just always something magical happening. I'd be sat with a local fisherman, sharing a fish that he just caught. There'd always be some kind of special moment, and there's so many. It's really difficult to pinpoint one sort of set occasion, really set moment. But yeah, the whole trip was just full of it, and it was incredible.
What about it are you most proud of?
I guess because I didn't really know beforehand if I could do this sort of challenge, and I'd never really walked that distance through them kind of environments. And I actually walked. In the end, I walked further in one journey than anyone else has ever done in history. And I guess I've got to really step back and think to myself how actually incredible it was that to do such a thing. And I guess I am. Yeah, I'm really proud that I managed to push myself to them limits and succeed. When I went away from my walk, I felt like a failure because I was so determined to finish, so determined to walk the length of the Zambezi River, that when I actually had to walk away from doing that, I felt like I'd failed. And now when I look back, there's no failure. It was just a safety decision I had to make, and I'm proud of it. Everyone else I know has told me, it's incredible. So I like to stay humble, you know. I don't like to sort of sing my praises too much, but it was incredible.
Chaz, what's next for you?
Well, I've got an ongoing project to walk a lot of Africa's rivers, so I'll be returning this year to the Zambezi. Then I'm drawing up plans for a potential walk along the Blue Nile late 2018. So that's another project I've got going in the pipeline. I've also got a couple of UK projects where I'm trying to walk the UK's rivers. They're more like practice walks, but it's an ongoing project. As well as that, I'm doing a lot of mountain-based expeditions around the world to try and get my International Mountain Leader Award qualification. I just want to keep adventuring, keep doing what I love, really. Keep leading expeditions, keep trying to inspire people to take adventures and just enjoy my life, I guess.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Well, I have my website, thewildestjourney.com. It's got all my contact details on there, all my expeditions, all my plans, my blogs and things like that. I've also got all my social media on there. If anyone wants to follow me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, it's all just on The Wildest Journey. There's all different pages there, and they can email me through that. There's all my email details and things on there. So if anyone wants to contact me or get hold of me and ask me any questions or any advice or want to know just how crazy my trip was, and just get hold of me via The Wildest Journey.
Chaz Powell, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing the story, and good luck to you on the second attempt on finishing the Zambezi River adventure, and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Recorded May 8, 2017. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.